Welcome back to Saturday Agenda. I'm Chris Kenny, and joining me for this week's political panel is New South Wales Senator, Labor Senator Matt Thistlethwaite. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Morning, Chris.
And in Perth, Western Australian Liberal Senator and Shadow Assistant Treasurer Matthias Cormann. Thanks for joining us, Matthias.
Yeah, good morning, Chris.
Now, the country's Treasurer, Wayne Swan, who's been in the job for 4 years, while Australia has weathered the global financial crisis and more, has been announced as the world's greatest treasurer. Matthias, can you find it in your heart to give him at least some congratulations?
Well, we think that award just has got no credibility at all. I mean, Wayne Swan is a treasurer who delivered 4 successive deficit budgets, $159 billion worth of accumulated deficits. He's delivered 19 new taxes, collecting $45 billion worth of new revenue, yet we're still heading for $110 billion worth of government net debt. And of course, he's made a complete mess of the mining tax, having caused the Prime Minister to lose his job in the process. So really, I mean, looking at his record, and if you contrast that with the record of Peter Costello, who faced a lot of challenges in his 11 years as Treasurer as well, if you compare that with Peter Costello's record, the Treasurer who has paid off $96 billion worth of Labor debt, who's delivered tax cuts, genuine tax reform, and so on, it just beggars belief that Peter Costello was ignored for 12 years and Wayne Swan is deserving of such an award.
But it's not a competition between Peter Costello and the current Treasurer. It's a competition between the world's current treasurers and Wayne Swan.
Sure.
Wayne Swan can say that Australia, like the rest of the world, got body slammed by a global financial crisis, and yet the Australian economy remains the envy of the Western world.
So what you're saying is, like, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king. And if you look at it from Greece or Spain or Italy, I guess, Australia's looking pretty good. But the reason Australia's looking good is because Wayne Swan inherited a budget from Peter Costello with no government net debt, with a $22 billion surplus, with a lot of the hard yards done in the area of tax reform.
Yes.
And, of course, ever since, he's stopped doing anything.
Yes, Matthias. So we know that. I better throw over to Matt. I mean, from the Labor point of view, I would have thought that the strength of the Australian economy is your great untold story, surely.
Well, that's right, and this is the politics of economic envy from the Liberal Party. The award is vindication and justified for Labor's good, strong economic record, particularly our management of our economy during the global financial crisis. Matthias mentioned net debt levels. Well, Australia has one of the lowest net debt levels in the OECD. I think it's around 7%. And the OECD average is about 47%. We've continued growth, we've protected jobs, and we're now in a better position than most economies moving into the next stage of uncertainty.
But Wayne Swan himself has given due credit to Hawke and Keating reforms before him, and even the reforms of Howard and Costello. So Wayne Swan has at least recognised that whatever plaudits he gets now has been built on the strengthening of the Australian economy by others.
Yeah, look, that's true. I think the award is a recognition that Australian governments for the last 20 years have had appropriate regulation of our finances, and indeed our prudential regulation has been good. And let's not forget that the global financial crisis began through inappropriate lending practices in the United States. That didn't happen in Australia because we've had good prudential regulation.
Well, I'd like to look at how our politicians sprout their messages on this program. I'd like to pick out some of the best and worst grabs of the week to show you on a Saturday. So firstly, I just want to go to this comment from Wayne Swan during the week.
I see this award as being very much a tribute to the hard work of millions of Australians during the global financial crisis and the global recession. And that hard work has made our economy one of the strongest in the Western world.
I think when it comes to selling a political message, Matt, that's a good message. Wayne Swan wasn't saying, heap praise on me. He was saying this was a reward for the whole of the country.
Yeah, that's right. I think he's recognised that in difficult circumstances, Australians have this great ability to come together and work as a nation, to pull our weight in an international perspective. We saw it during the Queensland floods when the Queensland economy was devastated. The Australian community came together and we worked through that. Just so through the global financial crisis, the BER program, we saw communities working together, investing in education, protecting jobs, and I think the Treasurer's comments were certainly justified and vindicated.
I think even if you give him some credit for his economic management, though, I think given the fact that the government's not getting a lot of credit for that, then he perhaps has to wear some of the blame for the way it's been sold. I want to go to another comment now, and this is how the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey, responded to Wayne Swan's award.
Should I praise a Treasurer who wants to introduce a carbon tax? No! Should I praise a Treasurer who wants to introduce a mining tax? No! Should I praise the most incompetent Treasurer Australia has ever had? No! This is a Treasurer who is the Stephen Bradbury of finance ministers. The difference is he is skating on Peter Costello's skates.
Stephen Bradbury, we all remember, is that ice skater who won gold for Australia when everyone else fell over. So I thought that was quite a witty line from Joe Hockey, but Matthias Cormann, not very generous.
Well, it's a very eloquent and succinct way of summing up Wayne Swan's performance over the last 4 years. I mean, I guess those of us who have been watching him here in Australia perhaps have a better appreciation of his many failings than people looking at Wayne Swan from Paris or Bonn. I think that Joe Hockey pretty well summed it up. And I mean, let's not forget, Wayne Swan is about to ready himself to impose yet another sacrifice on people across Australia, a job-destroying carbon tax which will push up the cost of living for everyone without doing anything to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. So his past failings haven't been enough. And I heard Matt talk about people across Australia making a sacrifice. Well, Labor wants people across Australia to make more sacrifices without it actually making any difference.
Well, I think we might come to the carbon tax next week, actually, because I want to switch the topic now back to border protection. We've heard a lot from George Brandis earlier in the program, Matt. How do you think that your Prime Minister and your Immigration Minister are going to sheet home the blame for new boat arrivals to the opposition? Isn't this just a non sequitur? Won't they have an enormous amount of trouble making this stick?
No, not at all. In the wake of the High Court decision, what Labor has sought to do is amend the Migration Act to re-establish the principle that the executive government has control over our border protection policy and decides how people come to this country. That's all we're trying to do. Now, the Liberal Party has opposed that amendment.
Yep, we've been through that in detail, but let's talk about the common man test, the common man and woman test, the pub test. I mean, most Australians know that this problem was fixed, that the boats were stopped until your government weakened the laws, softened the laws, got rid of offshore processing. Now you have the Prime Minister coming out in a very, very tetchy press conference yesterday trying to say that the flood of boats that's come since she weakened the laws is somehow the opposition's fault. It just won't pass the common person test, will it? Well,
the circumstances relating to the nature of the problem have changed. The Liberal Party had a policy of turning the boats around. The people smugglers worked that out, and what did they do? They disabled the boats, and they risked people's lives. We saw people potentially in drowning situations. Our defence forces were put in risky situations. The policy has moved on. We've got a new set of circumstances, and we've come up with a solution that's a regional architecture that we believe will work, and we're simply trying to restore that power in the executive level of government to make the determination about our border protection policy, and we think that is reasonable.
The opposition have said that they'll give you the legislative authority to put Nauru beyond doubt. Why won't the Prime Minister and your government swallow its pride and try Nauru? You know what? It just might work.
Well, we believe it won't work, and the expert evidence...
How do you know it won't work? You won't try it.
Well, for this reason, Chris, 95% of people who ended up on Nauru under the coalition that were found to be genuine refugees
of those,
ended up in Australia or New Zealand.
But processing is all about those who are not found to be refugees, and so only 40% of those who went to Nauru ended up in Australia. Why would you try and talk this solution down when it might be the best solution the country has?
We don't believe it's an effective deterrent. All of the people that come here on boats come through Malaysia, then Indonesia and onwards towards Australia. We believe to have an effective deterrent you need to remove that incentive for people to get on the boats. Nauru will not do that, but if we come up with a Malaysian agreement, which we had in place, but there's been some problems with it in the High Court, we're seeking to re-establish that. as a workable solution,
you were
and
wanting to
also
break the
working
law.
with Malaysia to increase our humanitarian intake.
Well, I just want to go to another grab now, and I'll come back to both of you for a reaction from it. So we've seen the Prime Minister yesterday go out and give a very tetchy, as I said, press conference. She's really putting all her eggs in this asylum seeker basket at the moment, border protection basket. Some commentators saying she's basically staking what's left of her leadership on it. So just have a look at this little snippet of how she finished up her press conference yesterday.
So yes, we saw a Liberal distraction campaign. I can understand that causes excitement and chatter amongst the parliamentary press gallery, but you wouldn't want to get confused between a Liberal distraction campaign and the realities. The answer to your question is no. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's the Prime Minister dismissing leadership questions. Matthias Cormann, she looked very much under pressure, very much desperately searching for some sort of support there yesterday.
Well, I mean, Julia Gillard is now a proven failure as our Prime Minister, and that is a terrible situation for the country to find itself in. Labour members and senators increasingly concede that Julia Gillard is now a proven failure. The problem that the Labour Party appears to have is that they don't know where to next. There seems to be a growing number of people who want Kevin Rudd. Then there is still a fair chunk of heavy hitters, the power brokers, the factional heavies, who say, no, we don't want Kevin Rudd back because we're worried about recriminations.
Right,
this is a terrible situation for the country to be in, because we've got this divided directionalist government there.
The Prime Minister says that the Liberals are trying to stir up leadership tension. I think Matthias is emphasising that point. Senator Matt Thistlethwaite, who was the better Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard?
Look, I'm not going to get into questions of that nature.
So it might have been Kevin Rudd, do you think?
Julia Gillard has the overwhelming support of the Labor caucus. This is just Liberal spin. We've got a significant reform agenda and we're getting on with the job.
Is she a better Prime Minister than Kevin Rudd was?
Julia Gillard is doing a fantastic job.
But is she doing a better job than Kevin Rudd?
Julia Gillard is doing a fantastic job as Prime Minister. She has all the support of the Labor Party caucus. We've got a significant reform agenda in place and we're working through that reform agenda. Carbon legislation in the Parliament at the moment. Now, a 2-month process of assessing those bills, putting them through. Minerals resource rent tax to come later in the year. I'm confident that once we get through this year, that we'll be in a better position. Then the focus will shift to the Liberal Party, who will need to explain to the people of Australia their proposed $70 billion worth of service cuts.
Okay, thanks very much for your time, and appreciate you joining us today. Senator Matt Thistlethwaite here.
Pleasure, Chris.
And also in Perth, Senator Matthias Cormann from the Liberal Party. Thanks for joining us. That's all we have today from Saturday Agenda. Stay with Sky throughout the weekend for